Dnyaneshwar. Dnyandev was a 13th-century Marathi saint, poet, philosopher and yogi of the Nath tradition whose Dnyaneshwari and Amrutanubhav are considered to be milestones in Marathi literature. Biography. Background. Dnyaneshwar was born in 1275 in Apigaon village on the bank of Godavari river near Paithan in Maharashtra during the reign of the Yadava king Ramadeva. The kingdom enjoyed peace and stability until invasions from the Delhi Sultanate started in 1296 CE. Arts and sciences flourished under the patronage of the Yadava kings, and Maharashtra attracted scholars from all over India. However, this period also witnessed religious degeneration, sectarianism, superstition and ritualism which involved animal sacrifices to many local deities. Dnyaneshwar would later criticize the religious degeneration of the day in his magnum opus Dnyaneshwari. According to B.P. Bahirat, Dnyaneshwar emerged as the first original philosopher who wrote in the Marathi language in this era. Biographical details of Dnyaneshwar's life are preserved in the writings of his contemporary Namdev and his disciples Satyamala Nath and Sakshidanand. The various traditions give conflicting accounts of details of Dnyaneshwar's life. The date of composition of his work Dnyaneshwari, however, is undisputed. According to the more accepted tradition on Dnyaneshwar's life, he was born in 1275 CE and died in 1296 CE. Early life. Dnyaneshwar's father Vidyalapant was the Kulkarni of a village called Apigaon on the banks of the Godavari river in Maharashtra, a profession he had inherited from his ancestors. He married Rukmabai, the daughter of the Kulkarni of Alandi. Even as a householder, Vidyalapant longed for spiritual learning. His disillusionment with life grew as a result of the death of his father and because he had no children from his marriage. Eventually, with his wife's consent, he renounced worldly life and left for Varanasi to become a sannyasin. Vidyalapant was initiated as a sannyasin by his spiritual teacher, Ramashrama, who is also called Ramananda and Nrisimhashrama, Ramadva and Shripad in various sources. When Ramashrama discovered that Vidyalapant had left his family behind to become a monk, he instructed Vidyalapant to go back to his wife and perform his duties as a householder. After Vidyalapant returned to his wife and settled down in Alandi, Rukmabai gave birth to 4 children: Nath, Dnyaneshwar, Sopan and Muktabai. Orthodox Brahmins of the day saw a renunciate returning to his life as a householder as heresy. Vidyalapant and his family were persecuted because of this. Dnyaneshwar and his brothers were denied the right to have the sacred thread ceremony, which in Hinduism symbolizes the right to read the Vedas. Vidyalapant eventually left the town for Nashik with his family. One day, while performing his daily rituals, Vidyalapant came face to face with a tiger. Vidyalapant and 3 of his 4 children escaped, but Nath became separated from the family and hid in a cave. While hiding in the cave, he met Gafyaninath, who initiated Nath into the wisdom of the Nath Yogas. Later, Vidyalapant returned to Alandi and asked the Brahmins to suggest a means of atonement for his sins. They suggested giving up his life as penance. Vidyalapant and his wife gave up their lives within a year of each other by jumping into the Ganges in the hope that children might be able to lead lives free of persecution. Other sources and local folk tradition claimed that the parents committed suicide by jumping in the Indrayani river. However, Orthodox Brahmins of the town still refused to accept the children as pure and suggested that they obtain a certification of atonement from the Pandits of Paithana, which was a center of Orthodox learning. Early writings. The Pandits of Paithana were struck by the spiritual learning and intellect of the four siblings and awarded them the certificate of purification. While returning to Alandi from the journey, the children halted at Navas, where Dnyaneshwar composed Dnyaneshwari, a commentary on Bhagavad Gita which later became a fundamental text of the Varkari sect. His words were recorded by Sakyadananda, who agreed to become Dnyaneshwar's amanuensis. Dnyaneshwari was written using the ovi, a meter, which was first used to compose women's songs in Maharashtra, of 4 lines, where the first 3 of the first and third lines rhyme and the fourth line has a sharp and short ending. According to W. B. Patwardhan, a scholar on Dnyaneshwar, with Dnyaneshwar the ovi trips, it gallops, it dances, it whirls, it ambles, it trots, it runs, it takes long leaps or short jumps, it halts or sweeps along, it evolves 101 graces at the master's command. Having experienced the rigidity of the caste system and the dogmatism of scriptural learning, Dnyaneshwar was sympathetic towards issues of the common people. He chose the new vernacular Marathi language, as opposed to the classical Sanskrit language, as a means of expression so that spiritual learning could reach the masses who weren't well versed in Sanskrit. In the 13th century, his works presented a departure from the prevailing socio-cultural ethos of high caste Hinduism, a trend which continued with other bhakti poets across India. According to tradition, Nath was not satisfied with the commentary and asked Dnyaneshwar to write an independent philosophical work. This work later came to be known as Amrutanubhav. Scholars differ on the chronology of the Dnyaneshwari and Amrutanubhav. Patwardhan has argued that Amrutanubhav is an earlier text than Dnyaneshwari because the latter is richer in use of metaphors and imagery, and displays greater familiarity with many different philosophical systems, such as Samkhya and Yoga. However, both Bharat and Ranade disagree with this view, pointing out that in Amrutanubhav, author displays familiarity with involved philosophical concepts such as Mayavada and Shunyavada, and while the text has simpler language, it reveals Dnyaneshwar's philosophical depth. Influences. The Mahanubhava sect and the Nath yogi tradition were two prominent movements during Dnyaneshwar's time that influenced his works. Mahanubhavas were devotees of Krishna who disregarded the caste system, the Vedas and the worship of the deity Vidala. Dnyaneshwar differed significantly from Mahanubhava's religious precepts. His thought was founded on the philosophy of the later Vedic texts such as the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, and devotion to Vidala formed the cornerstone of the egalitarian Varkari sect founded by Dnyaneshwar. However, the literary style adopted by Mahanubhava writers influenced Dnyaneshwar's works. According to R.D. Ranade, Dnyaneshwar stands to Mahanubhavas just in the same relation which Shakespeare stood to Elizabethan writers. Dnyaneshwar was initiated into the Nath yogi tradition by his brother Nivratinath. Sometime after the death of the parents, Sopana and Muktabai were initiated into the tradition by Dnyaneshwar himself. Founded by Gorakshanath, the Nath yogi sect had introduced the system of Hatha Yoga, which emphasized on yogic poses and physical fitness. Gafyaninath, a disciple of Gorakshanath, had initiated Nivratinath into the Nath yogi tradition. Dnyaneshwar's non-dualistic philosophy, usage of a vernacular language in his writing and an emphasis on yoga and oneness of Vishnu and Shiva were his inheritances from the Nath yogi tradition. The values of universal brotherhood and compassion espoused in his works came from his interactions with the devotional Vidala sect, a tradition which was already in existence during Dnyaneshwar's time. J.N. Farquhar also notes the influence of Bhagavata Purana on Dnyaneshwar's poetry. travel and samadhi. After Dnyaneshwar had written Amrutanubhav, the siblings visited Pandharpur where they met Namdev, who became a close friend of Dnyaneshwar. Dnyaneshwar and Namadev embarked on a pilgrimage to various holy centers across India where they initiated many people into the Varkari sect. Dnyaneshwar's devotional compositions called Abhangas are believed to have been formulated during this period. On the return to Pandharpur, Dnyaneshwar and Namadev were honored with a feast in which, according to Bharat, many contemporary saints such as Gaurabha the potter, Sanvata the gardener, Chokoba the untouchable and Parisa Bhagavat the Brahmin participated. Some scholars accept the traditional view that Namdev and Dnyaneshwar were contemporaries. However, others such as W. B. Patwardhan, R. G. Bhandarkar and R. Bharadvaj disagree with this view and date Namdev to the late 14th century instead. After the feast, Dnyaneshwar desired to enter into Sanjeevan Samadhi, a practice to sum up the life after entering into a deep meditative state. Preparations for the Sanjeevan Samadhi were made by Namdev's sons. Regarding Sanjeevan Samadhi, Dnyaneshwar himself has emphatically talked about relation between higher awareness and lighter pure energy in the form of electromagnetic radiation. On the 13th day of the dark half of the Kartik month of the Hindu calendar, in Alandi, Dnyaneshwar entered into Sanjeevan Samadhi. His Samadhi lies in the Sadesvara temple complex in Alandi. Namdev and other bystanders grieved his passing. According to tradition, Dnyaneshwar was brought back to life to meet Namdev when the latter prayed to Vithoba for his return. Dalmia writes that this testifies to the immortality of genuine friendship and companionship of noble and loving hearts. Many Varkari devotees believe that Dnyaneshwar is still alive. They opposed the plan by archaeologists to insert a thin fiber optic camera into the chamber more than 40 years ago. Many miracles came to be associated with Dnyaneshwar's life, one of which was the revival of his disciples Akshadhanan's corpse. During Dnyaneshwar's visit to Pathan to obtain a certificate of purification, he was confronted with a man who violently lashed at an old buffalo. When Dnyaneshwar expressed concern for the animal, he was ridiculed by Brahmins for being more concerned about a beast than the teachings of the Vedas. Dnyaneshwar retorted that the Vedas themselves held all life to be sacred and a manifestation of the Brahmin. The outraged priests pointed out that his logic implied that beasts should be able to learn the Vedas as well. An undeterred Dnyaneshwar then placed his hand on the buffalo's forehead and it started reciting a Vedic song. According to Fred Dalmia, the story signifies that divine is not a property of the learned elite, rather, it is a spread-out gift, a large S, over all creation. Dnyaneshwar was challenged by Changdev, an accomplished yogi who rode on a tiger with his magical powers. To replicate this feat, Dnyaneshwar humbled Changdev by riding on a moving wall. Dnyaneshwar's advice to Changdev was given in 65 verses called the Changdev Pasasthi. Changdev became a disciple of Dnyaneshwar's sister Muktabai. Philosophy, ontology and epistemology. Dnyaneshwar takes up the examination of being a Brahman in Amrutanubhav. He considers being to be the substratum of thought which enables thought and cognition. As being is prior to thought and concepts, it is distinct from Kantian categories, and methods of thought such as epistemological analysis cannot be applied to it. Dnyaneshwar believes that reality is self-evident and does not require require any proof. It antedates dualistic divisions into knower and known, existence and non-existence, subject and object, knowledge and ignorance. Dnyaneshwar highlights the limitations of the traditional epistemological methods used in Indian philosophy. He points out that any perception is validated only by another deeper understanding, while in establishing the rationality of reason, reason itself is transcended. Dnyaneshwar even cautions against reliance on scriptural testimony, which is accepted as a valid source of knowledge by philosophers of Vedanta and Mimamsa schools of philosophy. Scriptural validity, to him, stems from its congruence with experiential truth and not vice versa. Ethics. Dnyaneshwar's moral philosophy comes out in his exposition of the 13th of Bhagavad Gita in his commentary on the book Dnyaneshwari. He considers humility, non-injury in action, thought and words, forbearance in the face of adversity, dispassion towards sensory pleasures, purity of heart and mind, love of solitude and devotion towards one's guru and God as virtues, and the corresponding moral opposites as vices. A pessimistic view of one's life is considered as a necessary condition for spiritual growth in Dnyaneshwari. Dnyaneshwar writes that saints do not perceive distinctions and are humble because they identify all objects, animate or inanimate, with their own self. Devotion to Guru occupies an important place throughout the commentary. Many of its chapters begin with an invocation to his Guru Nivratinath, who is eulogized by Dnyaneshwar as the person who helped him cross the ocean of existence. The discussion on virtue and vices continues in his elucidation of the 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where virtues and vices are called divine heritages and demonic heritages respectively. Divine heritage comprises fearlessness, which comes from a belief in unity of all objects, charity, sacrifice, which comes from performing one's duties, and compassion in addition to virtues already enumerated, while demonic heritage consists of 6 vices: ignorance, anger, arrogance, hypocrisy, harshness and pride. The doctrine of karma yoga in the Bhagavad Gita is resurrected in Dnyaneshwari and its utility as a means of achieving actionlessness through action, and in establishing a harmony between the two, is examined. In the 4th chapter, the ideal karma yogi's actions are compared to the apparent movement of the sun, which while appearing to rise and set is actually stationary. Similarly, a karma yogi, though appears to act, doesn't really act. Performance of one's duties, acting without egoism, renunciation of the fruits of one's actions and offering one's actions to God are 4 ways which, according to Dnyaneshwar, result in actionlessness and self-realization. Dnyaneshwar's metaphysical conclusion that the world is a manifestation of the divine, and not an illusion, also creates an ethical framework which rejects renunciation and recommends performing one's duties and actions in the spirit of worship. Traditional Indian scriptures see Dharma, a Hindu theological term similar to Dharma, as a natural law that governs both the cosmos and human society. Performance of one's duties to uphold social institutions, such as marriage and family, thus becomes imperative, and duty overrides individual freedom. Dnyaneshwar is in agreement with tradition. He believes the divine order and moral order are one and the same and are inherent in the universe itself. He, therefore, recommends that all social institutions be protected and preserved in their totality. However, when it comes to the institution of caste, his approach becomes more humanitarian and he advocates spiritual egalitarianism. Reception and legacy. Elements of Dnyaneshwar's life and writings, such as his criticism of parochialism of the priestly elite, celebration of the family life and spiritual egalitarianism, would shape the culture of the Varkari movement. According to Delmeyer, Dnyaneshwar's life and writings have developed into primary exemplars of genuine religiosity for the Varkari movement, as well as crucial sources and focal points of bhakti devotion. Devotees of the Varkari sect in the Hindu Shaka month of Ashad join an annual pilgrimage called the Wari with symbolic sandals of Dnyaneshwar, carried in a palki, from Dnyaneshwar's shrine in Alandi to the Vidhala temple in Pandharpur. The padakas of Dnyaneshwar are carried in a palki for the Dnyaneshwar-inspired works of later poets saints of the Varkari movement. His philosophy of Chidvilis was adapted by Varkari writers, such as Nyandev and Nath, to their own works. Amrutanubhav's influence is visible in Nath's Astamalak and Swatam Sukha. Tukaram's works imbibe and explain Dnyaneshwar's philosophical concepts such as the refutation of Mayavada. Many writers, beginning with Nath, wrote commentaries were written on Amrutanubhava. However, prominent historians of Indian philosophy such as Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan and Surendranath Dasgupta, who were primarily focused on Sanskrit texts, ignored Dnyaneshwar because his works were in Marathi. Works undisputed authorship: Dnyaneshwari Abhavadipika, Amrutanubhava or Anubhavamrita, Changdev Pasashti, Haripath, Abhangas. Works attributed to Dnyaneshwar: commentary on Yoga Vasitha, Bhavana Vijaya, Ansikarana.